February 12, 1944, Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, London. Colonel David Strangeways stared at the deception plan that was supposed to save D-Day. It was garbage, complete garbage. The original Operation Fortitude proposal called for inventing so many fictional divisions that even Allied commanders couldn't keep track of them all. It suggested making the Germans believe that Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery could somehow manage two massive invasions simultaneously. It was the kind of plan written by people who'd never actually deceived anyone. Strangeways had. In North Africa, under Dudley Clark, he'd learned that effective deception doesn't make enemies think something. It makes them do something, and this plan would make the Germans do nothing except laugh. So Strangeways rewrote it. He threw out half the fictional units. He focused the deception on a single believable threat. He built an entire phantom army around one man. The general the Germans feared most, George S. Patton. In 4 months, this fake army, this collection of rubber tanks, radio static, and elaborate lies, would convince Adolf Hitler to keep 19 divisions and 2 armored divisions sitting uselessly in Pas-de-Calais, while 160,000 Allied soldiers stormed Normandy beaches 150 miles away. The deception would hold for 7 weeks after D-Day. 7 weeks when those German divisions could have crushed the Allied beachhead. 7 weeks bought with inflatable Shermans and a Spanish chicken farmer's imagination. 7 weeks that changed the course of human history. Operation Fortitude wasn't just a deception. It was the deception that won the war. The problem facing Allied planners in late 1943 was simple and terrifying. Everyone knew the invasion of Europe would come through France. Everyone knew it would probably happen in 1944. And everyone, including the Germans, could look at a map and see 2 obvious choices: Normandy or Pas-de-Calais. Pas-de-Calais made perfect strategic sense. It was the shortest distance across the English Channel, 21 miles at the narrowest point. Fighter aircraft based in England could provide continuous air cover. It was the most direct route to Germany's industrial heartland, the Ruhr Valley. The beaches were suitable for amphibious landings. 3 major ports, Calais, Boulogne, and Dunkirk, could handle the massive logistical support an invasion required. Adolf Hitler believed Pas-de-Calais was the obvious target. He'd planned to use the same route in reverse for Operation Sea Lion, the aborted German invasion of Britain. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, commander of German Army Group B, defending northern France, also expected Pas-de-Calais. It was where any competent military commander would strike, which meant the Germans would defend it with everything they had. The mathematics were brutal. Defending northern France, approximately 300,000 German troops. The 15th Army guarded Pas-de-Calais, 150,000 men. The 7th Army defended Normandy, 150,000 men. If the Germans knew where the invasion was landing, they could concentrate both armies at the landing site. The Allies would face defenders who outnumbered them 2-1, with the advantage of prepared defenses. And the ability to bring up reinforcements faster than the Allies could build up their beachhead. It would be a massacre. Eisenhower told MI5 before D-Day, "Just keep the 15th Army out of my hair for 2 days. That's all I ask. 2 days to establish a beachhead. 2 days before the Germans could bring their full weight to bear. 2 days to change the course of the war." Operation Fortitude would buy him 7 weeks. The foundation of Fortitude was laid in December 1943 by the London Controlling Section. This secret group of Allied military officers specialized in strategic deception. They'd learned from earlier failures. Operation Cockade in 1943 had attempted to lure the Luftwaffe into aerial combat over the Channel. It failed completely because the deception wasn't believable enough. The Germans saw through it immediately. The lessons from Cockade shaped Fortitude. Make the deception not just believable, but inevitable. Make the Germans see what they already wanted to see. Fortitude was divided into two operations. Fortitude North would threaten Norway with a fictional invasion force assembling in Scotland. The goal wasn't to make Hitler believe Norway would be invaded. The goal was to make him uncertain enough to keep troops there. 12 German divisions remained in Norway throughout 1944, 12 divisions that could have been in France, all held in place by radio chatter and double agents. But Fortitude South was the main event. It would create the illusion of a massive army group assembling in southeast England. 1st United States Army Group, FUSAG, an army that existed only in German intelligence reports, an army commanded by the one general the Germans truly feared. George S. Patton was perfect for the role. The Germans considered him the best Allied general. Aggressive, unpredictable, brilliant in offensive operations. Exactly the kind of commander who would lead the main invasion force. And in February 1944, Patton was available. Patton had made himself available by becoming a public relations disaster. During the Sicily campaign in 1943, he'd slapped 2 soldiers suffering from combat fatigue. He'd called them cowards. The incidents had nearly ended his career. General Eisenhower had relieved him of command and issued a private reprimand. The press had crucified him. His former subordinate, Omar Bradley, had been given command of U.S. ground forces for the invasion. Patton, the hero of Sicily, was sidelined. But Eisenhower was cunning. He brought Patton to England in January 1944, not to command the invasion, to command a ghost. On January 26, 1944, Patton officially took command of FUSAG. The assignment must have stung. Command an army that didn't exist. Play a role in an elaborate deception. Watch his former subordinate lead the real invasion. But Patton understood the strategic necessity, and he played his part brilliantly. FUSAG's order of battle was carefully constructed to be believable. It initially consisted of real units that were actually assigned to other commands. The appearance was that the Allies had 70% more forces in Britain than they actually possessed. Later, entirely fictional divisions were added to the mix. 11 non-existent divisions, 150,000 imaginary men, all supposedly encamped in Kent and Essex, directly across from Pas-de-Calais. The physical deception was elaborate, but not the primary tool. By 1944, the Luftwaffe was unable to fly reconnaissance over England. Allied air superiority was complete, but some precautions were taken anyway. Temporary buildings were constructed near likely embarkation points. Dummy landing craft were built and stationed in harbours throughout southeast England. 255 fake landing craft at Folkestone Harbour alone, made from steel tubes lashed to buoyant steel drums and covered with canvas. From the air, they looked convincing. Film studio set designers were recruited for the deception. Theatre craftsmen who knew how to create convincing illusions. They built barracks and headquarters buildings, all visible from aerial reconnaissance, all suggesting a massive military build-up. But the real genius of FUSAG wasn't the rubber tanks or fake buildings. It was more subtle, more psychological, more devastatingly effective. The inflatable tanks have become the iconic image of D-Day deception. Inflatable Shermans that could be inflated by 4 men in minutes. They looked absurd up close, but from altitude they passed inspection. Deployed in formation across Kent and Essex. Visible to any German reconnaissance that might get through, creating the illusion of armoured divisions preparing to embark. But Colonel Strangeways knew that physical deception alone wouldn't convince the Germans. The real deception would come through signals intelligence, radio traffic. The US 3103rd Signal Service Battalion and British 5th Wireless Group created a symphony of fake communications. They recorded real military radio traffic during exercises. Then they scripted false messages that matched the patterns German intelligence would expect. Radio operators transmitted thousands of messages daily. Unit movements, supply requisitions, tactical discussions, all suggesting an army preparing for imminent invasion. The Germans were intercepting and analyzing every transmission. Their signals intelligence was sophisticated. They could identify individual radio operators by their transmission style, their fist, so the Allied deception units had to maintain consistency. The same fictitious radio operator had to send messages from the same fictitious unit using the same transmission patterns, day after day, week after week, building a picture in German minds of Fusag's order of battle, location, and operational status. And Patton played his public role perfectly. He visited the fake encampments with photographers in tow. He gave speeches to non-existent divisions. He was photographed inspecting dummy landing craft. Every public appearance was calculated to reinforce German beliefs. The German intelligence services were watching. Patton knew it, and he gave them exactly what they wanted to see. But the most ingenious piece of human deception involved General Hans Kramer. Kramer was a panzer officer captured in North Africa in May 1943. By May 1944, his health had deteriorated. The Allies agreed to repatriate him through neutral Sweden. Before his departure, Kramer was invited to dinner with Patton. Patton was introduced as commander of Fusag. During dinner, Patton repeatedly mentioned Pas-de-Calais, casually, as if discussing his next operation with a fellow officer. After dinner, Kramer was driven to his departure point. The route took him through massive military encampments, real troops, real equipment, real preparations for invasion. Kramer counted divisions, noted equipment types, assessed operational readiness. He was a trained intelligence officer. He knew what he was seeing, or thought he did. The signs along the route said he was traveling through Kent, through the heart of southeast England, where Fusag was supposedly based. His guards confirmed it with loose talk. Everything Kramer saw matched what German intelligence already believed about Fusag's location and strength. But Kramer wasn't in Kent. He was in Hampshire, in southwest England. Every sign had been changed. Every piece of loose conversation was scripted. Every detail was part of the deception. What Kramer actually saw was the real invasion force preparing to embark for Normandy. But he believed he was seeing Patton's phantom army preparing to strike Pas-de-Calais. On May 23rd, Kramer was shipped to Sweden. He immediately reported to German intelligence. He'd seen Patton. He'd seen Fusag. He'd seen the massive build-up in southeast England. The intelligence was confirmed by a trusted German officer, an eyewitness, someone who had no reason to lie. Kramer flew to France to brief Rommel personally. He described the dinner with Patton, the troop concentrations, the state of readiness. Everything pointed to Pas-de-Calais as the invasion target. Rommel listened. Rommel believed. Rommel reinforced Pas-de-Calais. But the most critical component of Operation Fortitude wasn't rubber tanks or radio transmissions. It was double agents. And the greatest double agent of World War II was a Spanish chicken farmer who'd failed at almost everything he'd ever attempted. Juan Pujol Garcia was 32 years old in 1944. Born in Barcelona, he'd been a mediocre student, a terrible soldier, and a spectacularly unsuccessful businessman. He'd served briefly in the Spanish Army cavalry, but hated military discipline. During the Spanish Civil War, he'd managed to serve on both sides, Republican and nationalist, without ever firing a shot. Playing both sides came naturally to him, but Pujol despised totalitarianism. He'd seen communism up close with the Republicans. He'd seen fascism with the nationalists. He hated both. When World War II began, he decided Britain was the only country worth fighting for. He approached the British 3 times, offering to spy for them. They rejected him every time. No connections, no credentials, no experience. Thank you, no. So Pujol devised a more creative approach. He'd establish himself as a German agent first, then offer himself to the British as a double agent. In 1941, he approached the Abwehr in Madrid. He claimed to be a fanatically pro-Nazi Spanish government official. He said he could travel to London on official business. He had a Spanish diplomatic passport, fake, but convincing. The Germans recruited him. Codename, Arabelle. His mission, travel to Britain, recruit a spy network, report on Allied military preparations. Pujol never went to Britain. He went to Lisbon instead. And from Lisbon, using a tourist guidebook to Britain, newsreels from cinemas, magazines from the public library, and pure imagination, he began sending intelligence reports to the Germans. He claimed to be in London. He described travelling around Britain. He submitted travel expenses based on fares from a British railway guide. His reports were absurdly detailed and completely fabricated. He made mistakes. He once reported that in Glasgow, Scotsmen would do anything for a litre of wine. Anyone who knew Glasgow knew that was nonsense. Scots drank whiskey and beer, not wine. But the mistakes were buried in the volume of accurate information. He copied from encyclopedias, he transcribed from advertisements, he synthesized from newsreels. And amazingly, the Germans believed him. In April 1942, Pujol sent a report warning of a major Allied convoy preparing to leave Liverpool. Complete fiction. But the Germans expended significant naval resources trying to intercept it. That got British attention. Someone was feeding high-quality intelligence to the Germans. MI5's Section 5 began investigating. They traced the source to Lisbon. They identified Pujol, and they finally understood what they'd rejected 3 times. This amateur had fooled the Abwehr completely. Imagine what he could do with professional support. In April 1942, Desmond Bristow of MI6's Iberian section interviewed Pujol. Bristow was impressed. Pujol and his wife were brought to England. He was given the codename Garbo, after Greta Garbo, because he was the greatest actor in the world. MI5 assigned Tomás Harris as Pujol's handler. Harris spoke fluent Spanish. He understood deception at the deepest level. Together, Harris and Pujol expanded the fictional spy network. By 1944, Pujol supposedly controlled 27 agents throughout Britain. All of them entirely fictitious, all of them brilliantly characterized, each with a name, background, personality, and specialty. Agent 1, a Portuguese businessman in London. Agent 2, a Swiss businessman with contacts in military circles. Agent 3, a Venezuelan student in Glasgow who recruited 3 sub-agents, including a Greek seaman. Agent 4, a Gibraltarian waiter working at military canteens. Agent 5, a brother in the Spanish government who provided information from official channels. Agent 6, an idealistic South African wireless operator who tragically died in a fictional traffic accident, complete with obituary in a British newspaper. Agent 7, an ex-seaman working in Swansea. The Germans bought it completely. They were funding a network of 27 agents, paying approximately $340,000 over the course of the operation. About $1 million in 2024 dollars. All for agents who existed only in Pujol's imagination and Harris's detailed record-keeping. The complexity was staggering. Harris and Pujol wrote 315 letters averaging 2,000 words each, all addressed to a post office box in Lisbon. All written in Pujol's distinctive verbose style, a fanatical Nazi willing to risk everything for the Führer's New World Order. The letters contained a mixture of complete fiction, genuine information that was militarily useless, and valuable intelligence that arrived too late for the Germans to act on. In August 1943, they switched to radio communication. A fictional wireless operator, supposedly recruited by Agent 3, began transmitting directly to Madrid. This allowed faster communication and more volume. Between January 1944 and D-Day, Pujol sent over 500 radio messages. Some days more than 20 transmissions. Building trust, establishing credibility, creating the foundation for the greatest deception. In January 1944, the Germans sent Pujol a message. They believed a large-scale Allied invasion of Europe was imminent. They needed him to keep them informed. Everything now hinged on Garbo. Pujol played his role perfectly. His agents began reporting on Fusag. Agent 4, the waiter at military canteens, reported overhearing American officers discussing Pas-de-Calais. Agent 3's Greek seaman saw massive troop concentrations in southeast England. Agent 7 reported unusual military activity near Dover. Agent 2 had drinks with a loose-lipped British officer who mentioned mid-July as the invasion timeframe. Every report pointed to Pas-de-Calais. Every detail reinforced German preconceptions, and Pujol's credibility was unquestioned. The Germans had spent 3 years verifying his information. They'd invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in his network. They trusted him more than their own reconnaissance. But the most critical moment came on D-Day itself. June 6, 1944, at 3 a.m., Pujol transmitted an urgent message to Madrid. The invasion was happening, Normandy. Right now, multiple agents were confirming it. This was the real thing. The transmission was sent at 3 a.m. It arrived in Madrid at 8 a.m. But nobody was monitoring the radio. The German handlers were asleep. By the time they woke up and decoded the message, Allied troops were already ashore. The warning had come too late. Pujol was furious. His carefully crafted network had provided critical intelligence, and the Germans had been sleeping. He sent a blistering follow-up message. He demanded clarification about what had happened. He questioned their seriousness and sense of responsibility. He'd risked everything to send this information, and they'd ignored it. The Germans apologized profusely. It wouldn't happen again. They'd failed him. But his credibility had actually increased. He'd warned them. He'd been right. If only they'd been listening. Then on June 9th, Pujol sent the message that saved the invasion. It was long, it was detailed, it was devastatingly persuasive, and it was completely false. The message said that while the Normandy landings were significant, they were not the main invasion. Pujol's agents were reporting that Fusag remained in southeast England. Patton's massive army group was still preparing to embark. The real invasion, the decisive blow, would come at Pas-de-Calais. Normandy was a feint, a diversion to draw German forces away from the real landing site. Hitler must not send reinforcements to Normandy. He must hold the 15th Army in place to repel the main assault. On June 8th, 2 days after D-Day, the Germans had begun to doubt. The German High Command ordered the 1st SS Panzer Division and elements of the 116th Panzer Division to move toward Normandy. These units could have shattered the Allied beachhead. The invasion was still desperately vulnerable. Then Pujol's message arrived. Hitler read it. Hitler believed it. On June 9th, Hitler sent orders halting the movement of forces toward Normandy. The 15th Army would remain in Pas-de-Calais. The panzer divisions that were already moving were turned around, sent back to defend against an invasion that would never come. A German intelligence message sent to Madrid 2 days later confirmed the success. All reports received in the last week from Arabelle undertaking have been confirmed without exception and are to be described as especially valuable. 62 of Pujol's reports were included in OKW intelligence summaries during Operation Fortitude. The German High Command's strategic planning was based on information from a Spanish chicken farmer's imagination. The 15th Army remained in Pas-de-Calais through June, through July, into August. 150,000 German troops sitting idle while the Allies built up their forces in Normandy. Eisenhower had asked for 2 days. Pujol and Fortitude gave him 7 weeks. By mid-August, it no longer mattered. The German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army defending Normandy had been cut apart. Patton's real 3rd Army, no longer pretending to be Fusag, was racing across France. The German defenders of Pas-de-Calais were now threatened from behind. They abandoned their positions and fled. On July 29, 1944, Pujol received a message from his German handlers. The Führer himself had awarded him the Iron Cross for extraordinary services to Germany. Pujol and Harris crafted a humble response. Garbo expressed his unworthiness of such an honor. He remained dedicated to the Führer's cause. The greatest double agent of World War II had been decorated by the man he'd spent 3 years deceiving. In 1944, King George VI also recognized Pujol's service. He was made a member of the Order of the British Empire. Pujol is one of the few people ever decorated by both sides in a war. The Germans gave him the Iron Cross for services that helped destroy them. The British gave him the MBE for those same services. The impact of Operation Fortitude is difficult to quantify precisely, but the evidence is overwhelming. The 15th Army remained in Pas-de-Calais for 7 weeks after D-Day. That's confirmed by captured German documents and post-war interrogations. Eisenhower's own account notes that the 15th Army remained immobile until late July, contained by the threat of Fusag. The Allies had expected massive casualties in the first week. Allied planners estimated 10,000 killed or wounded in the first week of the Normandy invasion. Actual first-week casualties were significantly lower. The Royal Navy expected to lose 300 ships to German coastal defenses and air attack. They lost 12. Without Fortitude, the 15th Army would have reinforced Normandy immediately. 150,000 additional German troops would have arrived during the critical first week, when the Allied beachhead was most vulnerable, when every German counterattack nearly pushed them back into the sea, when Omaha Beach was a bloodbath and Utah Beach was barely holding, when British forces were stalled at Caen, when everything hung in the balance. An additional 150,000 German troops in the first week could have crushed the invasion. At minimum, they would have made the breakthrough from the beaches far more costly. Tens of thousands of additional Allied casualties, possibly failure of the entire operation, possibly postponement of the invasion until 1945, possibly Soviet occupation of all of Germany before Western forces could establish a foothold in Europe. The lessons of Operation Fortitude became fundamental to modern military deception. First, deception works best when it confirms enemy preconceptions. Hitler wanted to believe Pas-de-Calais was the target. The Fortitude deception simply reinforced what he already thought. The same principle that worked in Operation Mincemeat worked again in Fortitude. Tell the enemy what they want to hear. Make them feel smart for seeing through your real plans. Second, volume overwhelms scrutiny. Pujol sent over 500 messages in 6 months. The Germans couldn't verify everything, so they sampled. They checked a few reports, found them accurate, and trusted the rest. The accurate information was deliberately planted. The critical information was false. But buried in the volume, it was accepted without question. Third, multiple sources create credibility. Radio traffic said Fusag was in Kent. Double agents said Fusag was in Kent. Physical reconnaissance showed military build-ups in Kent. Captured German officers reported seeing Fusag in Kent. Every intelligence source confirmed the same story. The Germans never considered that every source might be controlled by the Allies. Fourth, sustained deception requires extraordinary organizational discipline. Fortitude ran for months. Hundreds of people were involved. Radio operators, set designers, double agents, intelligence analysts, military officers. Everyone had to maintain the same story. Every detail had to be consistent. One mistake could unravel the entire operation. The discipline held. Fifth, the payoff for successful deception is measured in lives saved. Not battles won, not territory captured, lives saved. Every German soldier who remained in Pas-de-Calais was a German soldier who didn't kill Allied troops on Normandy beaches. Every hour the 15th Army waited was an hour the Allies used to build up forces and supplies. Every day of the deception was a day closer to victory. After D-Day, Fortitude continued. The deception evolved. When Patton's Third Army deployed to France in late July, a new story was crafted. Patton had been demoted for his indiscretions. He'd lost command of Fusag. His replacement was Lieutenant General Leslie J. McNair. McNair visited southeast England, touring Fusag installations with photographers. Then McNair went to Normandy to observe the fighting. On July 24th, he was killed by friendly fire during Operation Cobra. Killed by American bombs intended for German positions. Even McNair's death was turned into deception. His replacement at Fusag was announced. General John L. DeWitt. Fusag lived on, threatening Pas-de-Calais, keeping German forces pinned down, creating operational flexibility for the real Allied armies. On September 28, 1944, Fusag was officially disbanded. The Phantom Army that had deceived Hitler for 7 months ceased to exist. Its component units, the real ones, were acknowledged to be elsewhere. The fictional divisions simply disappeared from German intelligence reports. Their work was done. Juan Pujol Garcia continued working for MI5 until September 1944. Then he went to ground. There were concerns he might be exposed as a double agent. Nazi retribution was still possible, so MI5 faked his death. In 1945, official records showed that Garbo had died of malaria in Angola. The Germans believed it, his wife believed it, his children believed it. Pujol moved to Venezuela and started a new life. For 39 years, he remained dead. In 1984, British writer Nigel West began researching double agents. He tracked down leads, followed rumors, found inconsistencies in the official story. In 1984, West located Pujol in Venezuela, alive, working as a language teacher, still keeping the secret. West convinced him to come forward. In 1985, Pujol published his autobiography. He returned to Europe. He reconnected with his ex-wife, who'd always suspected he was alive. He met his children again. They were furious that he'd let them believe he was dead for nearly 4 decades. He visited the beaches of Normandy for the 40th anniversary of D-Day, standing on the sand where men had died, men whose lives had been saved by his lies. Pujol died in 1988. The second time, it was real. He was 76 years old. He'd lived long enough to see his story told, to be recognized as one of the most important agents of World War II, to understand that his strange talent for deception had changed history. George Patton never commanded the Phantom Army after July 1944. He led the real Third Army in one of the most spectacular advances in military history. Across France, into Germany, everything the Germans had feared. But by the time Patton was devastating German forces for real, it was too late for them to stop him. Fortitude had bought the time necessary for Allied forces to establish an unbreakable foothold in Europe. Colonel David Strangeways continued his deception work throughout the war. After the war, he rarely spoke about Fortitude. Most of the operation remained classified until the 1970s. When historians finally gained access to the documents, They were staggered by the scale and sophistication of the deception. Military historian Michael Howard called it perhaps the most successful single deception operation of the entire war. Operation Fortitude proved that in modern warfare, perception can be more powerful than reality. A fake army can be more effective than a real one. Not in combat, but in shaping the battlefield before combat begins. The genius of Fortitude wasn't the inflatable tanks or the dummy landing craft. Those became iconic because they were visual, photogenic, easy to understand. The real genius was psychological, understanding what the Germans feared, understanding what they expected, understanding what they wanted to believe, and then constructing a reality that matched their fears, expectations, and beliefs. The Germans were looking for an invasion force. Fortitude showed them one, in exactly the place they expected to find it, commanded by exactly the general they feared most, preparing to strike exactly where logic dictated. Everything fit, everything made sense, everything confirmed their own intelligence assessments. So when the real invasion came somewhere else, commanded by someone else, striking at beaches they'd left less heavily defended, the Germans couldn't believe it. It had to be a feint. The real invasion was still coming. Patton was still waiting in England with Fusag. The 15th Army had to remain in position. Hitler's strategic paralysis in the weeks after D-Day was partly due to his own poor judgment, partly due to his reluctance to admit he'd been wrong, but mostly due to Operation Fortitude's sustained, multi-layered, brilliantly executed deception. By the time Hitler finally accepted that Normandy was the main invasion, by the time he finally released the 15th Army to reinforce Normandy, by the time German armored divisions finally arrived in force, the Allies had landed over 1 million men in France. They controlled the skies. They controlled the seas. They'd captured Cherbourg. They'd broken out from the beachhead. The window for stopping the invasion had closed. Fortitude had kept it closed. There's a memorial at Dover Castle today. In the tunnels beneath the castle, there's a reconstructed repeater station. This is where coded fake radio messages were relayed across Britain to simulate Fusag's communications. The museum explains Operation Fortitude to visitors, shows them the dummy landing craft, tells them about Garbo and Fusag, describes how the Allies saved thousands of lives through deception. But standing in those tunnels, reading about the operation, it's hard to comprehend the full scope. The millions of individual decisions, the thousands of people involved, the months of sustained effort, the risk that one mistake could expose everything. Imagine being a radio operator, transmitting messages for a fictional unit, knowing that German analysts were listening to every word. Imagine being the set designer, building fake headquarters buildings, knowing that one wrong detail could betray the deception. Imagine being Pujol, sending 20 messages a day to German handlers, maintaining the personalities of 27 fictional agents, never contradicting yourself, never breaking character. Imagine being Patton, one of the greatest generals of his generation, assigned to command an army that didn't exist while watching your subordinate lead the real invasion. Imagine being Strangeways, rewriting the entire deception plan in February, 4 months before D-Day, knowing that if your approach failed, thousands of men would die. They got it right. Every detail, every message, every fake radio transmission, every inflatable tank placed exactly where it needed to be. Every double agent maintaining their cover. Every piece of the deception fitting together into a coherent whole, and the Germans believed it. Not because they were stupid. German intelligence was sophisticated. They were thorough. They cross-checked sources. They verified reports. They analyzed data carefully. They believed it because Fortitude was perfect. The deception was constructed so carefully, with such attention to detail, with such deep understanding of how the Germans thought, that it became more believable than the truth. When the truth showed up on Normandy beaches on June 6, 1944, the Germans thought it was a lie. When the lie sat in Kent and Essex doing nothing, the Germans thought it was real. That's the mark of perfect deception, making truth look like fiction and fiction look like truth, until the enemy can't tell the difference. Until they trust your lies more than their own eyes. 160,000 Allied soldiers hit 5 beaches on June 6, 1944. Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, Sword. By June 12, over 326,000 troops had landed. By June 30, over 850,000. They faced determined German resistance. The 7th Army fought viciously. Rommel's defensive preparations, beach obstacles, minefields, bunkers, artillery positions, exacted a terrible toll. Over 10,000 Allied casualties on D-Day itself. The fighting was brutal, but it could have been so much worse. If the 15th Army had reinforced Normandy in the first week, if the panzer divisions had counterattacked while the beachhead was vulnerable, if German reserves had been positioned to strike the landing zones immediately, the casualties could have been 30,000 or 40,000. The invasion could have failed completely. Operation Fortitude prevented that. A fake army commanded by a sideline general, built with inflatable tanks and radio static, sustained by a Spanish chicken farmer's imagination, saved tens of thousands of lives. The last word should go to Eisenhower. After the war, he wrote about the role of deception in Overlord's success. He noted that the German 15th Army remained immobile in Pas-de-Calais until late July, contained by the threat from Fusag. He called the deception operation one of the critical factors in establishing the Allied foothold in France. Eisenhower had asked for 2 days. Just keep the 15th Army out of his hair for 2 days. Operation Fortitude gave him 7 weeks. 7 weeks bought with rubber and radio waves. 7 weeks that changed everything. The fake army deceived the Nazis. And in doing so, it helped win the war.